Welcome, everyone. I can't believe it's the last meetup of June. We're already halfway through the year. This is crazy, but welcome to the show. So, as always, I just want to start off by thanking our sponsors. This is hosted by Skillwave.training, which is the training company that I run, where we teach you how to be awesome with Excel and Power BI. You should definitely check out our courses there if you want to level up your game. Excel Guru is the parent company of Skillwave and also the creator and distributor of my Monkey Tools add-in, which helps you build better Excel solutions faster. Our next meetups that we have coming up, our next Excel track, we're looking forward to welcoming Lee Becker. This is going to be at 1 p.m. Pacific time, so midday on the coast here. She's going to be talking about Excel quick tips, not a formula in sight, so that'll be kind of cool. I remember years ago the Excel team telling us the percentage of workbooks that actually had no formulas in them, and I'm like, who could ever do that? So this is going to be kind of an interesting tie-in to that kind of thing. As far as our Power BI track, we've got someone really cool and interesting that's going to be coming, but we're not ready to share the details on that yet. So when we are, we will announce that. So watch out for that one. New in Monkey Tools, the latest release before the meetup about one of these features. And basically the biggest things that we've released in this in the BiblioMonkey, I finally fixed the tab orders. I got an email from a user saying, how come the tab orders are all messed up, Ken? Can you please fix these? With the main benefit being I won't have to wonder why they're out of order anymore. So I'm like, you know what, that seems like a good reason. So we put that in place. Those are all done now. In addition, we have also added drag and drop inside the BiblioMonkey, so you can drag and drop items rather than having to click on something and move it up one step at a time. So if you are reorganizing things, this should definitely help with that process. And naturally, of course, we've got our plethora of bug fixes as that are always in there. We're constantly trying to fix things and improve them, and there are more things going to be coming as well. You will notice on this one here, I have highlighted the release number, the 9286. That is our major release that goes on with this one, but I also recommend you be on the 0.28970 is the most latest one, and that's because there is a minor bug fix that went into the drag and drop immediately after I posted the original version. So you definitely want to be on the most recent if you got an update and didn't notice that particular part. Speaking of Monkey Tools, we are halfway to International Monkey Day, which happens on December 14th. So in order to celebrate that, we've got a 20% off discount going on Monkey Tools annual and lifetime licenses. If you'd like to enter the code Monkey Around, that will help you get 20% off so that you can do more with less cash out, which is always a good thing as well. As far as the programs that I have running, things that we've got coming up, our next semester of our Excel Fundamentals Academy kicks off July 9th. If you've got people in your organization or maybe yourself want to go in and fill in some knowledge gaps to get yourself to a good, solid, comfortable, intermediate level of working with Excel, this is a fantastic program for that. We look at, core formulas, we look at pivot tables, data visualization, theory and practice, we look at Power Query. So there's some good stuff that goes on in this. About 30 hours of training and coaching, and it does give you access to my Ask Ken Anything sessions that we hold twice a month, which are 2-hour live Teams calls where people ask me anything, and I basically help them build solutions and apply things to their world here. So if you're looking for a coached version of a course where you can actually get interaction with the real instructor, this is a great program. In addition, if you are already past that level and you're ready to start taking on Power Pivot and Power BI, that's where our Self-Service BI Academy comes into. This is my most advanced training program here, and this is sort of my flagship product. Includes access to the Ask Ken sessions, some fantastic material. You get copies of my book, my recipe cards, Monkey Tools Pro, all kinds of good stuff here. And I definitely invite you to go and check that out as well. This meetup, along with all meetups, is recorded and will be hosted on the Skillwave YouTube channel. Usually takes me about 24 hours or so to get that uploaded. Once we've got the recording posted, we will actually message you in the meetup site. So if you're not subscribed to the channel, you'll still get a message there to let you know that it is available. And pretty close to my last slide here. No, this is my last slide. If you'd like to come and speak to our meetup group, we're always looking for new speakers. Whether you've spoken to us before and you got something new, cool to show, or whether you've never spoken at a meetup group before but have something interesting you'd like to share, we would love to hear from you. Just fill out this little survey here and we'll get in touch and we'll get you on our show. And on that note, I think that's it from me, Joseph. I think at this point in time, we get to turn it over to you, my friend, to talk about what's new in Power BI. And we've got a couple of months worth of updates to do, right?
Yeah, we have Well, I think we have more than two, but we'll be focusing on two today. So yeah,
I
double
mean,
bang for your buck.
to be fair, you weren't here last month, and I just want to say we missed you. So
That's true.
welcome back. So,
Thank
and
you.
we're
Thank
looking
you.
forward to seeing what you have for us today.
All right, cool. Thanks, Ken. Let me grab the screen and we will jump in. Yeah, so hello, everybody, to what's new in Power BI this month for June. As I was just saying with Ken, we'll go over June and we'll go over the May feature summary as well, because I didn't present it last month. So we have 2 months worth of new features to go through. The first big thing, which is right at the top of the feature summary, Power BI is turning 10. Woohoo! And I think this user group is turning 9, I want to say, this year. I think it's been 9 years, so time flies. We've done quite a lot of what's new in Power BI.
I think, Joseph, this is the end of the 9th year. I believe we actually start at the beginning of our 10th next meetup. I think I got to confirm that.
Wow.
Yeah, I know, it's crazy.
No, it's gone by very quickly. So yeah, Power BI turning 10. And then, as always, for some of the new features, the Microsoft Power BI update blog post is the place to go. All of the new features, whether it's new features that are in preview or features that went from preview to generally available, or just updates to existing features, are usually all captured in the blog post and associated YouTube videos. It's broken down into different sections. I'm going to focus on the reporting section this month. We can see there's lots of new features, so I don't have time to cover everything. And if there are things that you want to dig into more, I definitely recommend checking out the blog post, but also check out some of the comments at the bottom of the blog post as well, because then you can see if other users are reporting bugs or just their feedback, and you can get a sense of just sort of some of the thoughts from the community. But let's start with reporting, and we're going to start with updates to visual calculations. This is a feature that has been sort of iterating and coming out with new functionality for the last at least 6 months, probably more than that, probably closer to a year now. And I usually pick these updates to present with what's new in Power BI, just because I think it's such a cool feature. It's definitely changed the way that I develop Power BI reports, and it's made some things that were previously really can be complex with DAX a lot simpler, just doing it within the scope of a specific visual within the Power BI desktop app. So the big update this month was to create visual calculations faster with parameter pickers. So I will jump into Power BI desktop in just a second, but what this feature allows us to do is previously we did have some bespoke visual calculation functions. And when we would go through, it would pre-populate the parameters that we would need to input to get those functions to work. But we would have to go in and sort of like type out what we wanted to reference ourselves. Like in this example from the blog here, we would have to type in like category or sales amount after this lookup function as an example. Whereas now we can see in this preview, we have these little drop down arrows that we can use just to pick all of the fields and measures that are available to us within our visual. So to see what that looks like, we can jump in here. And so we can see we have a matrix visual with client type and total balance here in the bottom left-hand corner. And if I want to add a new visual calculation, let's say lookup with context, if I zoom in here, previously I would have to copy that sort of placeholder parameter, go in, type in like client age or client type. Now I can just hit this drop down button and pick client type, for example. I can select the measure that I want. And now I just have to type in the value I want to look up, like let's say regular. And of course, it doesn't work in the live demo. I cannot convert regular to type. I think I got these backwards. Let's change this total balance and client type. There we go. And so now we return the values with a lot less typing than we would previously have to do. I'm going to come back to this lookup function because I got a little bit ahead of myself, I think, because that was one of my favorite features from May. If we go to easily refer to your visual with visual calculations, we have lookup and lookup with totals. So these are two brand new visual calculation functions. I kind of stole my own thunder, getting a little bit ahead of myself, but it's a lot easier to do these lookup values within the context of a visual now. We can do a lookup with values, which is what we just looked at, looking up like a measure based on something in our rows, for example. But we can also look up with totals as well with a new function. So if I jump back into Power BI, we can see what this looks like. If I just zoom in. Based on the previous code I did, just using the lookup function, we wanted to look up total balance where the client type is regular. So we could see these two values match because the client type is regular for these rows. Down here, none of these client types are regular, so we're not returning any values. We could manipulate that a little bit, but I'm just going to skip over that for now. But if we just wanted to return, rather than these individual client age lines, and just return the client total, this 107 billion, I guess, for every line, we could use a different function that lookup with totals. So if I do a new visual calculation, lookup value with totals, we get the same experience with the drop down. So I'm going to do total balance on client type, and I'll do regular again. And now we see we get that repeated value for every line within our matrix. So if I wanted to do like a percent of total based on just one of these totals, it's now easier to do this step by step instead of all embedded within a DAX function. I can define my total balance just with like a regular DAX measure. I can define like a lookup value of totals with this new lookup totals function, and then I can divide the two. And it's done a lot simpler within the context of the visual, and we can see exactly what values we're returning step by step, instead of sometimes when we use DAX, we sort of have to use our imagination a little bit more. So I really like these two new functions, as well as that parameter picker from the visual calculations update. If I go back into my report, let's just clear out these visual calculations for now. And one of my other favorite features from this month is we finally have the general availability of a feature that's been in preview since 2021. So it's been 3.5 years, I think it was towards the end of 2021. For all of the Excel users out there, sparklines in Power BI is now generally available. So if I want to add sparklines to this matrix, I can right click on total balance, the measure in my field wells, and say add a sparkline. On the x-axis, I'm going to add something from my date table. I'll just add year, month here. And one of the new functionality released this month, along with just the general availability of sparklines, is the ability to apply calculation groups either to individual values or the entire sparkline. I don't have time to go into a deep example with this today, but there is a really well written up post and example and use case within the June blog post. So I would definitely recommend to check that out if you do use calculation groups and you want them to apply to your sparklines within your matrix. I'd recommend checking that out. In this example, I don't have calculation groups in this report. So if I click on either of these values, it doesn't make a difference. And we see that from this little info icon there. But if I create those sparklines, we see that we have this trend over the last 2 years worth of data roundabout. And we have all the formatting that we're familiar with in the format pane under sparklines at the bottom. I can do things like add markers at either every point in my sparkline, just at the highest point or the lowest point, or when the values go negative. So it is a way that we can enhance our matrix visuals if we want. Again, I know these are very common in Excel, but also nice that we can have similar functionality in Power BI. Let's move on to one of my next favorite features. I don't remember if this was from June or if this was from May, but it's an update to the list slicer. So this is some of the new slicers in Power BI is something that I've talked about quite a bit over the last few months. If we look at the drop down from the visuals at the top, we see we have a few slicer options now. We have the button slicer, the list slicer, sort of like the grandfathered slicer and the text slicer. I've looked at all of these, and new features are released every month to enhance all of these different types of slicers. I'm going to be looking at the list slicer this month. So we have a list slicer here. It's a nested list slicer. So we have client type and then client age underneath. So this actually matches the rows in our matrix visual over here, just a basic two-tiered hierarchy. And when we have a hierarchy in our text slicer like this, if we click on one of the values like regular, let's uncheck that. Typically, when we click on a higher level of the hierarchy, all the values underneath are selected by default. So then it's just a quick way that we can pick things out. However, we now have the ability to restrict only selecting at the lowest level of the hierarchy by clicking on this restrict to leaf nodes option in the slicer settings. So if I toggle this on, we can see sort of what we just saw. When I try and click on regular, it actually doesn't allow me to click on that higher level of the hierarchy. It just expands it to the lowest level, and I can only select these leaf nodes, if you will, like the most detailed level of our hierarchy. It only lets me select there. And if I untoggle this, we get a lot more options. And if I toggle that higher level back on, we can select everything. So if we want to force user behavior, or if we only want people to select like one value at the leaf node, we can still have a hierarchy to make some of that exploration easier for our users, so they can see how things are grouped. We don't just have one great big list, but that we can force them to only pick at the leaf node, which I think is kind of a cool update. Another quick update from last month has been an update to the area chart. And this is also just kind of a cool thing that previously was a little bit of a headache. It's just a simple little feature, but I think it's cool and I can see myself using this. Is right now we have an area chart, which is like a line chart with the area underneath filled in. So we can see this is a trend in balance by date. And what we're able to do now is if I select a particular line from this chart, I can select a category from the x-axis. So in this case, a specific date. So why don't we pick January 2020? And I can pick specific color just for that segment of our area chart. So if I wanted to change this to like a pink, we now see just a slice of our area chart has been highlighted in a different color. So this can help draw attention to, if we want to go like a change of the year, we can color, 2019 in pink, 2020 in blue, for example. If we want to highlight outliers, if we want to highlight just specific periods, we can now do this, which I think is cool. Obviously, we've been able to do this with column charts, been able to do this with labels and with markers and stuff like that. But now we actually see like the whole segment as a different color. It's just a cool little visual thing that I've liked and I've been playing around with a little bit from this month. So I know I've been going for about 15 minutes. There's just one last small update that I want to look at. And that is in the Power BI service. So this is the version online of the report that we were just looking at that's published for a few months now. And I've looked at this previously in one of the earlier meetup groups. We're able to edit our data model online now in the service by editing the report and going to open data model, which I've done here. By default now, instead of being able to edit things right away, we're in the viewing mode, so we can't make any changes to our data model. But if I go to editing, we now have the ability to go in and like add DAX measures, delete DAX measure, change the code, relate tables, unrelate tables. And one thing we haven't been able to do up until this month is create or adjust our field or numeric range parameters. So we now have the ability within the service to edit, update, create field parameters, which is really useful because previously if we wanted to do this, we'd have to download the report or just do it on a local version, republish the report, and off we go. So it's just another new function and feature that we're able to do all online without having to download or look at the report locally. So with that, I think I went through 6 of my favorite features from the last 2 months. Obviously, there are a lot more. I do encourage you to check out the blog posts. But at this point, I'm happy to pass it back to Ken, pass it back to Helen, and we can get started with the feature presentation. So I'm looking forward to it, and thank you everyone for your time.
Cool stuff. Thanks, Joseph. Great to have you back, and appreciate you doing this as always. Excellent. And yeah, now it's my great pleasure to welcome Helen Wall. So hi, Helen. Welcome to the show here. Let's just make sure I see you're muted at the moment. So
okay, you should be able to hear me.
Much better. Absolutely.
Yeah, I wasn't actually talking, so.
There you go. Awesome. Well, yeah. So welcome, Helen. For everyone who doesn't know, Helen is an MVP that I actually got the chance to meet just this year down at the MVP Summit. We were chatting about a variety of different things that we need to get you on our show. So here we go. We've got that arranged. And at this point, Helen, I'm going to let you take over. And one question I did want to ask you, just as far as questions go, would you like me to moderate them in? Are you going to watch the chat? Do you want to save them for later? What's your preferred method for that?
Well, so it's a smaller group, so I think maybe just when there's a break point, people can ask, because there's a few different pieces, and it might be easier to kind of take break and ask questions at different pieces, at different sections, rather than having to kind of like navigate back to a certain report or something.
Perfect. Then why don't we do this? If there's questions that come up as we're going along, if people want to throw them into the chat, and then if you want to make a break and call for questions, I can interrupt and, well, not interrupt, but be invited to come and share what those questions are. Does that work?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Perfect. All right, the floor is yours then.
Okay, so I'm going to start with a set of slides, of course. So my section today is going to be on color theory, and this is something that has become something of personal interest to me over the last few years, but also it's kind of become an area of interest that I realize is important to share, because it's not something that a lot of people really realize impacts their day-to-day role, and it does have a huge impact on the people that you're working with it. So if you're presenting Power BI model to someone, if you're sharing a visual, is you want to make sure they're able to see it and they're able to really understand what's going on without struggling. Because what I've seen over in my experience is that people often don't speak up until they've kind of struggled with something for a while. So we want to think about making our creating things that apply color theory so that other people can use them. So for those of you, feel free to say hello on LinkedIn. Here's my QR code that will take you to that screen, and I'm happy to please just say hello and that you attended the meeting, and I'm really happy to hear I love getting notes from people about stuff like that, especially if hopefully you learned something new from this. So this is about me, and you can read about me on my LinkedIn profile. So how does color theory work? So when I started using colors, I felt like I was kind of randomly guessing about how everything works. So what we see when we're looking at a digital color model, which is called an RGB, so red, green, blue, what we start with is we start with a black screen. So think of when you turn, your computer starts with a black screen, and as you add different colors to it, the colors, each pixel changes. So this differs from what we could call the older color models, which is CMYK, which is where we have a white sheet of paper and we're adding color to it. So black is the full saturation, whereas you start with white and go to black, as opposed to RGB models where you start with black and go to white. So when we start with these colors, the way that I think of it is these 3 rings, and in the middle here, that the overlapping part of the Venn diagram, that is the color output that we get, and this is how the different color components contribute to it. So when we fully saturated all the colors, we end up with white. And this is again going to the other end of the RGB model. When we display all the fully saturated red, green, and blue color values, we see a white. And this is what we're interested in, is that center section of this overlapping diagram. And we also see that we've got what these are called the hex values for the colors, and these FF is the highest color value that you can get. So we see FF for all three of these colors. So what does this mean? Now, for a long time, I was kind of guessing about what they meant because, you know, it's a combination of you know, digits between 0 and 9 and letters between A and F. But really what they are is the hexadecimal color. It's not a hexadecimal color base, but it's a hexadecimal numeric base. So rather than counting from 0 to 9, which is a decimal, so 10 numbers, we're counting from 0 to 16. And what this does is it allows us to count from 0 to 255 with just 2 digits. So for example, this is a hex color for this kind of quite pretty teal color. And we see how this red, green, and blue, each one of this hex value can be divided into, after the hash sign, can be divided into 3 different pieces for the red, green, and blue colors. And putting all of those together gets us to the color in the middle. Now, to make this more readable, what we're looking at here is we can translate this then back into decimal color values, and these range from 0 to 255, which we see would make our numbers longer. So that's why we use what are called hex codes for colors. And so I think this is an important piece to understand, because what we have is you know, breaking it down and being able to kind of convert between them. If you look at the RGB color version, it's a lot easier to understand than when we look at a hex color value, which looks like kind of a string of 6, you know, random characters. So this is so we can use functions. Excel has good functions to convert hex into decimal values and vice versa. Power BI, not as much. So often I will just use the Excel functions for that. So when we talk about color theory, there's a few different you know, key terms that I've mentioned so far, and then I'm also going to mention in my example. So with I mentioned the RGB color models. This is a digital color model that uses red, green, and blue color values. We've got the hex code, which is the shorthand notation for the RGB color shade. The CMYK is the print color model. Now we're going to talk about a few other terms with respect to how color theory works. The first is luminance, which is the amount of emitted light. It's often used interchangeably with brightness. It does sound very familiar. It does sound, you know, it does seem very similar to lightness, but it's not exactly the same, and we'll see why in a moment. And the key things that we're looking at when we want to analyze color theory is we're looking at our contrast ratio is a big part of this. And what this does is we have a ratio between the background and the foreground color, and it can be either way. You can do the background on top of the foreground. The ratio is going to be the same regardless of which color is the foreground, which color is the background. But what this gives us is it gives us a contrast ratio, and this measures the luminance between the foreground or background, vice versa. And the higher the number, the easier it is to see for the human eyes. So that's really a number we want to keep in mind. And in order to measure the contrast ratio, what we're going to find helpful is the Web Accessibility Content Guidelines, so what's called the WCAG. And what that will help us is to figure out whether our contrast ratio meets those benchmarks. So a few options for calculating the contrast ratio, and I'm going to show a few of them today. We can use the Web Contrast Color Checker. Now this is really helpful if you already have an organizational color palette. and you've got, let's say 7 or 8 colors that you're working with, and you want to check what color you're going to use for the foreground. So the contrast checker is kind of my go-to approach. But that's going to work best if we just have a few colors. If we want to do more of the wide scale, these color calculations, we can use more of the tools that we like, using to solve problems like Excel, Power Query, and we can also use DAX. So I mentioned the color contrast ratio, and these content accessibility guidelines. So this company is actually they are an organization that kind of controls, not controls, they give guidance for how we should approach choosing colors. And this is among many other things. And we can kind of see what they're talking about here too, because we've got different levels. So we've got a lower threshold and a higher threshold. So meaning here's kind of the lower bar and then the higher bar that we want to, try to meet. And what we find is that for larger text, we can use smaller fonts. So the lowest contrast ratio that we can get is 3. Oh, sorry. And then what this does is this gives us, if we're looking at large font on, if we're looking at this really large font on, any color background, we actually have more flexibility. The bar itself is lower for doing that because the text is larger and easier to see. But then if we look at text that is smaller, we actually want to increase our contrast ratio to make that easier to see. And then we've got the higher threshold, which is kind of the higher standards we can think of them. And from there, we've got, we have to make our contrast ratio for large text even higher. And then for smaller text, we also want to make that higher. And you can see here, actually, what I did was notice the color backgrounds for this, in that this is at the bottom lower right quadrant, we see a much lighter background compared to the white font. And as the contrast ratios become higher, we see that this teal background that I'm so fond of, it becomes darker. And then for the contrast ratio, the 7, which is the highest one for regular text, we're looking at 7, and we can see it's a pretty dark teal. So what I would say is, and I'll show how I analyze this, is that it's helpful to kind of err toward the side of using darker fonts or foregrounds where needed, because there are a lot of things that people find hard to see. And I would say that, and a mistake that anyone can make, in the past, and I did this in the past too, is that well, I can see it, it should be fine. And the reality is that I'm not designing something for myself, I'm designing it for other people. And so I want to make sure that anyone can pick it up, regardless of whether they're working on something right now or using it, is that they want to be able to, anyone can open the report and read it, and it's going to meet these contrast ratio thresholds. I can show the website for this. And we'll come back to this in a second. So we've got, this is what I referred to as the website for checking the contrast ratios. I mentioned if we have, this gives us a white background, a black is going to be 6 zeros. So this is the perfect contrast ratio. It's 20:1. The contrast between the foreground and the background is the highest that we can get. Whereas if we make this the same as the foreground and the background the same, we see it's 1, which means you can't even see it. So are there any questions so far on this? And I've gone through a few examples, and any questions on what I've gone through so far?
No particular questions, but there is a comment from Tanya here who says, as a user that finds contrast to be extremely important, I recommend using APCA over WCAG. So do you have any comments related to those, or is that something else that you're going to be bringing up?
I could take a look at that right now. I think that when in terms of you mentioned using it as a guidance, is that we can calculate this ourselves. What was the acronym that they mentioned?
APCA. There's actually, if you check the chat, there's actually a couple of links that Tanya's provided there as well. So you can go directly there. But Tanya also made a comment that the fuzzy edges of the squares creates a bit of a contrast issue as well. And
yes, it does. It does. It's supposed to kind of emphasize that a bit as well. This is as you mentioned before, I kind of err toward the side of like the extremes for that. Well, so I have a friend that's web design, and that was what she introduced me to a few years ago. So that's why I used this one. I've also, the API is very easy to use, and so that's one of the reasons for it. I'd say that the calculations are going to remain the same. They've actually increased the standards for, going back to the diagram, as they have increased the standards for that over the past few years. They've definitely, if you look at a lot of reports and anything that's been published that involves kind of using this concept, is a lot of the background colors have become darker over the last few years, and the background or foreground colors have become darker, just to make them, it makes it a lot easier to see. So, kind of what my approach with this is that I try to get it over 4.5, no matter what, because just to make sure that I've kind of made that threshold.
Yeah, I'll just get the one last comment from Tanya before we move on. This one is just basically that the WCAG is more tolerant than the APCA. I guess that's the big difference between the two. So, for what it's worth. So.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Okay, so another thing we want to worry about is color blindness. And this impacts, quite a few people. And a lot of times people may not share that they cannot see certain colors. And we've got, so we see in the first column, these are normal colors. And this is just a selection of a color palette that I've used a number of times. And we can, we can see what these colors look like. So if you have normal vision, this is what you'll see. And then there's different types of color blindness. And so here are three of them. I believe the most common one is the deuteranopia, because what that does is you see red and green become almost indistinct from one another. And this is what we do see as probably the most common kind of color blindness, the inability to distinguish between red and green. And so it's very ironic that a lot of color palettes will default to using red and green, because those are the most indistinguishable colors. Those are the most common colors that hit the color blindness issues that people face. So one way we can see what these colors would look like. And so oftentimes orange and green, we see here or not orange and green, but orange and blue are a great alternative to the red and green, because we do see enough contrast between, we see these blue colors and the orange, and we see that both of them have enough contrast between them that people can see. So that's something to keep in mind. The other thing too is that this is probably the maximum amount of colors you want to use. You don't want to use, dozens of colors. If you focus on just using a few and grouping them, it's going to make things a lot easier to see, because you don't have to distinguish between as many colors. So one way to, this is maybe more of a party trick than anything else, but or just discussion for an office visit, for an optometrist or something. But these are called Ishihara plates, and what they do is they help determine if someone has color blindness, because they use color combinations that people with certain types of color blindness can't see. And the letter will look different depending on if they have the presence of a certain color blindness. So if you're interested, I definitely recommend, you know, looking this up and trying this out. It's a neat item to use because it is accessible for anyone can look at it and see how color blindness has these different permutations that impact people. So with that, we'll go into an example within Power BI. So I have a few different ways to calculate this. And I'm going to go into Power Query to show some of the examples, show how I did some of these calculations. I initially did this in Excel, and I can go and you know, walk through this more. The reason I did it in Excel was that it was going to be reusable, and I wanted to have it saved somewhere that I could you know, transfer to other places. So I ended up doing it in Excel because that allowed me to kind of pare things down a bit quicker. But you can do it with the contrast checker as well. I can show an example of how to do that later. So walking through how all these choices about what we're going to use for color, I have these pages, report pages in Power BI that just show how this works. So if we just start with a random color, this doesn't mean anything. It just looks kind of like a rainbow repeated multiple times. And so we want to look for some way to sort it and to order it. So one way to do that is by luminance. Now what we see here is that we've got a luminance of 0. Remember that a black color, right, is going to be all the way over here with luminance value of 0. And then what white is going to have a luminance of 1. So it's the brightest color that we have up there. And we see how the colors kind of follow, you know, we see the darker shades of, you know, black and purple, but it's not like linear as far as the way the color spectrum displays when we sort it by luminance, because we can have darker reds, you know, reds, for example, and then lighter oranges that are harder to see. What is actually interesting, and I'm just going to jump ahead for this, is that the density of this is that the colors themselves are denser on the darker side, as opposed, you know, there's a lot fewer lighter colors on the other side of when we look at this, you know, the color spectrum. So this actually does have gaps between them. And I took some colors out here because otherwise it would just be too slow to graph. So that was part of the reason why I ended up using Excel for that, was I wanted to be able to take some things out really quickly. So this gives us a sorted color luminance, and this is really the key for doing these calculations. If we look at what they look like here, we can see the relationship between luminance, which is on the which we saw on the x-axis, and lightness is a logarithmic one. And if we look at the black, seeing this as black just shows us the density of the way, you know, what we look at. There's a lot more colors that are darker in terms of, you know, it's a lot denser on that end of the spectrum. But that's not really kind of what we're getting into. I thought that was an interesting thing to point out. But what we're really interested in is, if we go back to even just the sorted one, is based on each one of these colors, is how am I going to pick the optimal foreground or background color to put on top of them. Now, I mentioned before, what is important to look at for this is that the luminance of 0, black has a luminance of 0 and white has a luminance of 1. So if we're looking at picking a color to go on top, we typically want to pick black or white, or as close to those as we can, because that will optimize the contrast ratio. So I'm going to focus on choosing between black and white foreground colors on these background colors. Even if that's, if you want to use another color, you can calculate another way. But you typically will see, white or black foreground colors in a lot of designs. So that was how I limited what I was, what I was going to show and make that a bit easier to understand. So when I put the contrast, remember the contrast ratios, I have these as calculations in my file. And these are all stored in this color, in these color calculations. So we've got the red, green, and blue, red, green, and blue values. We've got the luminance, and we can sort these by how, I'm just going to sort them by ascending. We see that black is a luminance of 0, and we see how this goes up from there. And this is not including every single color, because otherwise that would be millions, and we can't even see that on the chart anyway. So decisions had to be made, and one of the decisions I made was just to do these in increments of five between them. So there, you can see that all of these are multiples of 5 to limit the amount of colors that we see. And we've got a few calculations here, and I'll show more in a moment how to do this, because I think once we see how this works, we'll be able to kind of work our way backward and explore different methods for doing this. So when we look at the contrast ratio with white, so for a black background color, that's going to be a perfect ratio, as we saw with, the color contrast checker. And then when we've got the contrast ratio with black is 1, because that's the lowest value we can get, because we can't see any of it. So we've got these calculations for the contrast ratio with white and the contrast ratio with black. And what I'm going to do here is I put these on the chart itself. So notice, for example, one thing that is interesting here is that there's a linear relationship between the background color with a black font, but it's an inverse relationship when you look at with white. So really what we see here is when you look at the crossover, like between choosing them, because we want to choose whichever line, black or white, whichever line is higher on the chart. And we notice that around, this is 0.18, is where there's luminance of 0.18 is where that crosses over. And so it's actually a lot lower than people realize. So you think you'd be kind of like, if you think about something uniform and putting something right in the middle, you would expect it to be right here. And what this really means is that if we wait until it's, if we're using white font and we wait until it's too light to make the decision to switch over in a darker one, it's just going to be really hard to see before we realize that. So the color, this crossover between them is actually, the threshold is much lower for the luminance value than we would otherwise realize. And part of that has to do with the density of it, because you do the color, it's a lot denser for the number of colors on, the darker side than it is on the lighter side. And I'm not, this is what I've understood about color theory. This is something like, oh, I need to learn more about this. But for the purposes of, making decisions to use in Power BI visuals, this is what I've found really helpful. So of course, being modelers, we want to optimize what we're going to select here. So we want to we've got our black line, we've got our white line, which I used as gray just so that I could see it on this particular background. But what I'm really interested in is the optimized contrast line. So notice that this keeps us for the most part above 4.5. If we use a threshold of 7, it's going to, we're going to be a bit below that. But if we use the minimum threshold, going back to that, what we could use as a reference for ourselves, we see that these colors, if anyone thinks about the colors they're using, you don't often see like red used as a background for text. It's often used as kind of a standalone, color element. And the reason is we see there's a lot of red colors here, and they're really hard to see with either a black foreground color or a white foreground color. Or if we want to use red font on something, it's still hard to see. So, and I think that really, this quantifies why people say, try to avoid using red on this, because it is harder to see. And these are kind of the luminescent, like fuchsia colors. So these are, this gives us a guideline as so we can have an idea about what colors we can use, the available background colors, and then being able to choose between black foreground colors and white ones. So I can, this is just something that I created with a few calculations, because I've used this before, is I'm able to add the different lines to the visual. And really, even if we want to emphasize which ones to use, being able to show something like this would give us an idea. Okay, here are the background colors, and what's the best selection to use? And then we've got something here to help us select them. So if I scan over my different colors in this kind of mini bar chart, it will tell us which font to use. And we can also, it gives us the luminance value, which we already know from the x-axis. And then it gives us the contrast ratio. We can see it decrease to here, right? So we see this burnt orange is really hard to see with the white. We should use a white font in that case, but it's still hard to see. It's because it is not an easy color for humans to see. And so you want to kind of probably tint this a bit darker, put some black into it so you can, so it's a similar shade of color, but it's going to contrast more with the white font. And then we can see all the colors that we need to use the black font for. So this was kind of fun to put together. This is essentially like a mini color scale that I fit at the bottom, and then showed what the contrast ratios look like on the top. So does anyone have any questions on this so far?
I don't think we have any questions at the moment, no.
Okay. So a few ways this gives us an idea of how to use those fonts. So this is a helpful guide to looking through this, right? And what we can do is kind of print this out and put this up, or just constantly think about how to make how to choose colors wisely so that people can see them. Because again, what we see here is that this is a contrast. We have the optimized contrast ratio, which is going to say use white font, but it's not an optimal approach because it's still going to be hard for some people to see. And it looks kind of washed out for both lines. It doesn't do justice to either color choice. So then how do we get to some of these colors? So I showed briefly some of the calculations behind the scenes. And I'll show a bit more of this. So for this one, I just put this in Excel. As mentioned before, it was a way to use it. And I think I was sending it to someone, or I must have been sharing it. And I can walk through the Excel file, but I can also start with one that I think is a bit easier to use, which is the color contrast checker that we can use as a reference for our own calculations. I mentioned before, we've got, I use the web, I use this web accessibility checker, and I look at, the discussions on, online for this, but what I'm really interested in is this. We've got a contrast checker, and then we also it has an API. So we can see here, let's print it to put our JSON results. So we send our colors to this API. The great thing is it doesn't require an API key. It's probably not going to change. It's pretty straightforward. It's a great example of how an API works if you're looking to introduce someone to this. And And we've got a foreground color, a background color. Again, they can be in any order. And we can just enter it and we can send the results to the API and see how it works. So we've got the ratio here and it gives us whether or not it fails or passes. This is example of white font on a white background. It's got a ratio of 1 and it fails all of the tests because we can't even see it. So conversely, I can also change, if I make the background color black, and notice you're not including the hash signs on here. So if you want to make this a more programmatic approach, you want to remember to include the hash signs, for conditional formatting, and then to drop them when you're doing something like this. So this is going to be kind of the other end of this where it's a perfect choice of colors because the contrast ratio could not be higher. This is the darkest possible font color on the lightest possible background color. So we have a contrast ratio of 21. So we can come up with these combinations of different colors. And I'm going to give this one, just give another color. And this is light gray font on a white background. And again, this is the contrast ratio for this is so low that we can't see it. One thing I would say to be careful of too is that sometimes the default options for that we see on Power BI visuals might be harder to see. I know that for a long time, there was like a gray background that was automatically put on a lot of labels, and that was really hard to see. And so you can change it. You can set it up in a report theme. This is a helpful way. If you've got, let's say, 4 different colors that you're going to start with, this is a helpful way to kind of check what the optimized foreground and background color will be. So what I'm really interested in is that I'm going to, first of all, check that whether white or black has a higher background. And then I want to use one of those color contrast thresholds to determine whether or not it can work. So I'm going to go I'm going to use this as a way to set up calculations in Power Query. So now I'm going to add, we're just going to create a new query for this. So I'll call this the background color. And I'll just say, this is going to be, we're going to start with black. We're also going to do white. And I'll do the gray. And then what other colors? I'm going to actually borrow some from these colors that I use here. I do like I'm just going to use the dark orange.
Helen, I think we've lost your screen.
Oh, you have?
Yeah.
Okay. Should be back on?
That's better, yep.
Must have been some shortcut that I didn't know about. Okay, so I'm just going to give a few different colors here to use as an example, just my favorite colors from here. And I'm going to use I could use the dark teal. I'm going to use the one that's a little lighter so that we can kind of see how it makes see how these colors are impacted. So okay, so these are our background colors, and then I'm just going to say a white foreground, and I'll make all of these. And actually for this, I'm going to walk the walk on user accessibility by actually giving these proper color names. The black, white, they're light gray. dark orange, and teal. That'll make it a bit easier to understand here. So the white foreground is it's helpful to remember that white is fully saturated, so all Fs. Black is no color at all, so all zeros. So let's do this for the black foreground as well. Okay, so I've entered a few different colors I can use here. And now what I want to go do is now there's limitations to using an API call. This is a cool example. I would say this is a neat way to do this is to scale it out, figure out the colors once, and then probably lock down the colors in your organization so that you have people know what color, if I'm using this background color, I need to use this as a foreground color, so that not only do they not have to do these calculations again, but also it's not going to, this is one of the examples of what is it called, the mashup queries, where it doesn't actually refresh automatically. So I'm going to create a function to do that, to calculate the color contrast. So if I go back to this calculation here, and this is a really kind of fun example for an API. So I'm just going to copy this, and then I'm going to create a new query for the web. Now I can go into more detail for this, so feel free to ask about this. How much time? So I've got this budgeted in for like another 20 minutes, Ken.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, if people want to drop off, they can. When they can always pick it up on the recording later. So yeah, you do what you got.
Okay, so there is a web API key. I'm just going to use the initial one so I have to do less work. So we can get these results returned. What we're really interested in here is the contrast ratio. I want to pick the wider black foreground that's going to be optimized. So we've got an API query. I'm going to convert this into a function. And I'm going to what I'll do is I'll just change them late. I could properly do this with the setting up parameters, but I'm going to change this and show how to do this. Or alternatively, we can also, I'm going to modify this later so that I can just use, ultimately I want it to go in the color API as a way to calculate which optimized black or white foreground I'm going to use. And I'm just going to actually, okay. So this is probably, I'm just going to call this the web aim API query. And so for the results, just modify this. So sticking with something that's very uncreative and say foreground color, F color, and then let's call it B color. And then I'm going to set this as Okay, so we have a foreground color and a background color we're sending to the API. And then I'll just use black as the foreground color and the background color as, and notice it doesn't matter if you capitalize them, which is less work to do. This needs to actually be set as a, this needs to be set to another one. So in the interest of time, that I don't want to go, I don't want to kind of bore everyone with some of these details. But what I'm interested in here is going back to our function. What I'm interested in here is I want to be able to send a flexible inputs to this API. So one way I can do that is I can also do this. So going back to our color APIs, I'm just going to add another column that involves calling this query. And I think this is, if I would just go, this is, okay, so this would be number to start with. So let me actually do one that's going to be, doing this kind of the easy one. Or okay, sorry, I don't have the notes. I have an example I can show for this. So anyway, I'm going to, and I should actually be able to, I'm just going to send these, I'm just going to send this, I'm going to do this. Okay. So, and with this, the nice thing about this, I'm really only interested in the ratio. So now I can go back into my formula and I'm going to just edit this accordingly. So the font color, this is the foreground color, is going to remain the same. If I'm going to calculate this as the white contrast ratio, I want the foreground color to remain the same. So I'm going to make this white. And then the background color, I want this part to be flexible. So I'm just going to update this accordingly. And the other thing that we saw earlier was that we need to take out, I'm just going to say text, so this is going to be the end. I'm going to say I want to use the foreground color, or no, the background color, sorry. And I'm just going to take the six characters on the is on the right, because I don't want to include the hash sign. And that's just one way to kind of quickly take it out and expand the results. Hang on. See if this returns. So the meeting thing just moved in front of it. Okay, so now this gives us a contrast ratio for each of the white colors. And I'm going, hang on, I don't want to make that a whole number. Just getting a bit overzealous there. So we can see here that we've got perfect contrast ratio, two terrible ones, and honestly, two terrible other ones. So with the white doesn't work well for a number of these. So I can also copy my formula, and I'm going to the one before. And I'm going to change, I can just copy this over, and I'm going to create another column that's going to just calculate the black contrast ratio. So I just need to change the foreground color to use black, which is zeros. I don't think you have to remember any other color code other than black and white. And then you can look up the rest of them because the black and white is the most common one used here. And also that does help, gives you a little bit of street cred with graphic designers. So I learned a lot. I have a friend who's a good friend who's a graphic designer, and I asked her a lot about stuff like this. And so they're more than happy to share their wisdom, about how a lot of this works. And I'm just going to use the ratio. And I'm going to rename both of these. So this is the black contrast ratio and the white contrast ratio. Okay. So we see here that going back to this is also why I showed the visuals earlier, is that this gives us an idea of why black or white are the two colors we want to compare between, because we see here that some of these colors, like light gray, is so terrible with a white font, but it works so well if you've got a light gray background with a black foreground on top of it. So then I can just use to kind of choose my optimal, you can choose the optimize. I could ultimately say which one is bigger, but what we're really interested in is I'm going to say this is going to be the optimized font color or foreground color to be consistent. And here I'm going to say that if the white contrast ratio is greater than the black contrast ratio, then the result is going to return. So if the white contrast ratio is higher, then I'm going to return white as the foreground color, which was these 6 F's followed by the hash sign. Now notice we're not using hash sign to send the API request, but we do want to use it for applying conditional formatting, as we'll see when we load it into Power BI. And then if it's not, and if that case is not true, then I'm just going to return. It's just going to use a black font. So any of the contrast ratios, we're just saying that if the white contrast ratio is higher, then we're going to use, that's going to be, if the white contrast ratio is higher, we're going to use white as our font. Otherwise, we're just going to use black. So then I can load it. I should have removed the other ones. I'll just go back and remove that in case anyone asks about this later too. I don't want to, it's confusing. Okay. So using my, just going to create this table, which is going to be, of course, like too small, but background color, and well, actually put the color here. Okay, so we've got our colors. And then I'm going to format the background color using the field value. Okay, so we've got these colors, and we can see, we can't really see some of them very well, but fortunately we have calculated a color for, we're going to then optimize our foreground color to use the field values from what we just calculated. So the optimized foreground color, this, make sure this picked it up. I think the calculation, I need to double check that. It does have this.
Helen, can you check your table again and just make sure that you've only got 6 Fs in there? We've got a comment that somebody saw 7 Fs at one point in time.
Oh, okay. It's hard to see, I will say that. Yes, that would be the case. Thank you. I could have used a function for that, but I think, let's see. Yeah, it's really hard to see those repeating values. Okay. So there we have it. This is the optimized foreground color. Thanks for noticing that. Okay, so this is one way to, if you're using a set, so say you set this up with a report theme, is doing these calculations is one way to make sure that you're able to see, you can make sure to see the font on top of a color. So you could use this for any visual. You could use it for data labels. You could use it if you're creating a card visual and you wanted to use a color gradient or a color background. You could choose the optimized foreground color against any given background color. So this is one way to do it with the using just calculation from an API that will calculate the color contrast ratio. You can also calculate this index. You can calculate it in Power Query. I just calculated it using the API because that was something I could show in other tools as well. So that's how to put this together. I think this is probably a chart that I have, this particular chart, and I'm going to put the rest of out here. This is something that I try to keep in mind all the time is, okay, if I'm going to put an optimized contrast ratio, I need to figure out a way that it's going to be, what font color is going to be the easiest to see on any given background color. So this is a helpful way to think of it, and also a reason to avoid using fuchsia in your reports, or just something that's very bright that's going to be hard to see with either black foreground or a white foreground. So any questions on this? I know we're at time.
Yeah, we've got one from Henry asking, will there be other font colors other than black and white that could be even more optimized given certain background colors?
Those are going to be the most optimal foreground colors you can use, because any of the other colors in between, they're not going to have that, right? So if we go back to this, the luminance, right? Is that black is over here and white is all the way over here. So any of the other colors in between, they're going to be less optimal than using either black or white, but you can use them, absolutely.
Yeah, so I think Henry's asked yellow on teal, and I mean, I guess Henry, the
That's
sort of
super
comment,
hard to see.
but the comment would be just depending on what the darkness is of the two
Yes.
individual colors or lightness. I mean, you're still
Yeah.
going to end up being able to potentially make a contrast that works, but it wouldn't be as extreme as going with the two ends, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
The only other question or comment in here, I'm going to put this out here. So the fix to the 7Fs came from Fernando,
Thank you.
and Fernando is hoping that you'll accept his LinkedIn request now. So, but
Yeah.
there you go.
I was actually thinking it's harder to see, and it's even harder to see those little Fs. I was like, I should have put this in something beforehand, because here I am typing this out, and I like kind of, it's a lot of replications of saying, and yes, I know there are Power Query functions that do that, but just, for being able to just in the moment of doing that, I didn't want to introduce something else.
Yeah, sometimes just easier to type the characters rather than try and use a function anyway, right?
I know.
But
Yeah.
typing 3 pairs is hard. So, yeah, I don't see any other questions in here, but Helen, thank you so much for coming and doing this. It's been interesting to look at for sure, and pretty cool little tricks there to dynamically be able to slice those things out. And I see a note in here that somebody's looking forward to the recording because they missed the first 45. I will definitely go and get this produced, and hopefully we'll have it up in the next 24. But again, just watch the Meetup site. We'll post about it there.
We can edit out the part about the 7Fs.
Nah, that's no
it's
fun.
A lucky number in some places, but like, yeah, that was not lucky.
It's funny though. Like I will say I won't edit it out, and here's the reason why: is because I have got multiple pieces of feedback from people, particularly with my presentations, that they love it when I make mistakes, and the reason being is because it makes them feel that like, hey, this is normal. And I think that's kind of an important part of doing this too, right?
Yeah,
so,
who also said that was Linda Weinman.
Oh, there you go. There you go.
So it's like, I have mistakes are great, Smith. So yeah, it's the the troubleshooting part of it. And there was the part that with the web API was that I'd done that before, and there was another adjustment I was making. I was trying to remember what that was. So I hope it's helpful for everyone. That was something. I had like a series of videos. I have a Power BI Weekly series, and that's through LinkedIn Learning, and I had a series on colors because I got into it, and one of the producers I was working with was a graphic designer. So I said, okay, here are all these things I want to learn about and talk about. And there's actually one where I have a color saturation and it changes on the card. But yeah, I would say one thing I learned is just to be a lot more like pointed about doing that than you otherwise would be, because I've put white for a white background on yellow, because yellow used to be more of the de facto, Power BI scheme, and people said I can't see it. And that, okay, well that's good to know and something I need to factor in. So I try to make things darker where you can, even if it just involves dark. If you're using white font, try to darken the background, or just try to use dark font. It's kind of trying to limit things to make it better.
There you go. Awesome. All right. Well, I think at this point, like I said, I don't see any other questions coming in. Just lots of appreciation for the session. So thank you again for coming and doing this, Helen. I really appreciate it. Folks, I'll get this posted up in the next 24 hours. We'll let you know on Meetup. Thanks very much for coming, and don't forget to check out our next Meetups that are coming up. We'll hopefully see you all soon.